Broadcaster, produces everything, thinker too. Andrew Denton, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
There's a personal reason for this, isn't it? Your father?
Yeah, that's where it started when he died 18 years ago, and so many people I've spoken to have similar stories. His last 3 days were in pain. The pain relief was not enough, and I wondered then, as I wonder now, why?
And he was the man who wanted to die by walking into a swimming pool full of whiskey, wasn't he?
Filled with single malt whiskey and just keep walking into the deep end. And I don't think that's a bad ambition.
It's not a bad idea. Okay, where have you been and why?
Why? Because starting back from that day, and a few years ago I read an article by a Tasmanian writer talking about her father, Hugo, who is dying of cancer in the Netherlands. And under their laws, he was granted euthanasia. And the description of his death, last week spent farewelling friends, last night with his family, a death on his terms, I thought, why can't we have that in Australia? What's stopping it? So I set off 8 months ago, and I've been following this path ever since. And I decided I wanted to speak to the people in these countries where this happens. I wanted to speak to the opponents to see what the arguments against were. I wanted to seriously investigate it. And I've come through that with a very strong conclusion, as you said. We have a problem in this country. We have, in fact, I think people will be shocked to hear what is happening in this country in terms of the way people die in pain and the decisions people are making to end their lives. And as you said, we already have assisted dying in this country, but there's no regulation. Doctors are faced with very, very difficult situations. It's not working for doctors, it's not working for patients. And why our politicians are so silent on it, I think, is something that deserves to be asked and needs to be answered.
Did Kit get help or not?
No, he didn't. And, it was interesting at the time, our family GP, who I've spoke to as part of this process, and which I'm pulling together as a podcast series for next year called Better Off Dead. I remember at the time he said he wasn't in charge of my father's treatment in a hospital, and he said it was very wrong. He should have got more help. But he also said at the time, I wouldn't want a law for assisted dying. And I was puzzled by this. And I realise, and there are many doctors who are not comfortable with it. And of course, it is legitimate to hold that position. But I realise his view is, I will do the right thing. I will make this judgment. And I suspect he would. He's a good doctor. But we as patients shouldn't live in a world of Dr. Lotto where maybe that doctor's going to help you and maybe that one won't. And there's plenty of doctors out there who have a strong religious belief who will only go so far with giving you pain relief because their morality says further than that is not allowed.
I'll to get to what you discovered in a moment, but there is an aspect to it which I don't think is often considered, which I'm sure you would understand. Personally, I experienced some years ago, I was misdiagnosed with terminal cancer, given 6 months to live. I wrote a magnificently unsuccessful book about this. but I discussed with my doctor immediately, okay, he diagnosed, said, righto, I'm going to have to cope with that, but are you going to help me when the time comes? I thought he said yes. He said later, no, he didn't. It wasn't his view that should happen. But that took an enormous weight off my shoulders.
Yeah.
That I thought, okay, now I've got to cope. I'm going to tell the family that I've only got 3 months to live. But I have now got control over this disease because I've got control over the nature of my death. And that is empowering, I think, for people, even in the very early stages of a hopeless diagnosis.
Oh, totally. And one of the most surprising things I found in Oregon, 30% of people who get this medication, and it's not dissimilar in the Netherlands, don't take it. And I thought, why? And it turns out, exactly as you said, having the medication, having a sense of control over what's going to happen is palliation in itself. And, there are two universal truths that I've discovered, that death is complicated and people don't want to die. And the implication that's often made by opponents that there'll be some kind of a rush once you introduce these laws is, of course, nonsense. As this fabulous doctor in Oregon said, when asked why so few people in Oregon, in fact less than 0.5% of all the people who die in Oregon use their laws, when asked why so few people use it, he said, I'm amazed anyone would think there'd be an avalanche anywhere because it turns out people just don't want to die.
Of course, the other point is, and we should recognise, palliative care can work for the majority of cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a number where it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think, everybody in this debate agrees that palliative care provides a valuable service and deserves as much funding and research as can be thrown at it. But by their own admission, they cannot deal with all pain despite optimal care. And in my research, there's a Wollongong University collates all the research from the 106 palliative care units around Australia, and it showed that last year that 20% of patients who died in palliative care died in moderate to severe pain. Now, this is not to say palliative care aren't good at their job. It's the limits of medical science. And the question is not, are palliative care good or bad, but shouldn't we have a choice in that situation? If the pain and the dying is too much, we should have a choice. And at the moment, there are two sets of rights here. Our right to have a choice of what happens at the end of life, and a doctor's right to say, I don't wish to participate in an action that may end your life. That's how it works overseas. Those rights are both respected and they work side by side. But in Australia, only one set of rights have been respected, and it's not the patient's.
What's the world's best practice? What do you find?
I think it's a combination of things. What I found in Belgium and the Netherlands, their entry point is unbearable and untreatable suffering. And the reason they've done that is it's not just diseases like cancer and heart failure, which are the vast majority of people that use these laws, but there are other people with longer illnesses like motor neurone disease and MS, and even older people who have a series of irreversible chronic ailments, none of which are terminal in and of themselves, but makes their life unbearable. So it encompasses all of those. But I also think the Oregon system, which is called voluntary assisted dying, whereby once you've gone through all their safeguards, and there are plenty, a doctor will prescribe you medication that you and only you can take if you choose to take it when you're ready. So it removes any question that somebody, as is often said, is going to come and quote-unquote kill you. It is your choice, and that is as it should be. And if you are somebody who has a moral objection, or you reach a point in your illness where you go, as you said before, it's just enough that it's there, or that your disease overtakes you and you die, that is how it is. But if you are somebody for whom I've reached the point where I need to go now, and I want to get my family around me, or I want to go however it is I want to go, but I can control it, then you have that choice too.
So what do we need? What controls? Do you need to be confirmed as terminally ill? Do you need to be confirmed as being of sound mind and not suffering from some sort of suicidal state? Do you need a number of doctors and psychiatrists to line up and authorise all this? Do you need to be able to administer it yourself?
Well, how it works, a combination of, again, those two systems. First of all, competent adult is the absolute baseline. You have to be a competent adult. If you're not even going to get through the first gate. Secondly, both these systems, you have two doctors. You have your consulting doctor and a specialist, independent of each other, who have to agree that either in Oregon you have 6 months or less to live, or in Europe, unbearable and untreatable suffering. They have to discuss all other options with you. What they do, particularly in Europe, is they make sure they're having these conversations with you away from your family to be sure that this is your decision and not something that somebody else is trying to force you towards. If they detect that there are psychological problems which may be driving this, a psychiatrist will get involved. In places like Belgium and the Netherlands, there are in fact what's called some psychiatric euthanasias where they deal with psychiatric illness. They're very much at the fringes of this. There's a very small number of them, but they also accept that unbearable and untreatable pain can fall in that area. If you go through all those gates, and in Oregon, for instance, it's compulsory that you be offered hospice care as well. If you go through all that gates, then and only then will you be granted either the right to euthanasia or the medication. But even then, it is still entirely your choice as to whether or not you exercise that right.
How do you? Have you seen the Phil Nitschke Suicide Machine? It's down at Mona.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is, and I've actually sat there and seen how experienced it, as it short of taking the drug, obviously, and that is confronting in itself. How do they administer this drug?
Well, in the Netherlands, it's the doctor comes and injects it. In Belgium and in Oregon, it's a medication that you drink.
Just drink it. Yeah,
and that's why I favour the Oregon system, because it is entirely down to you. Nobody can say that somebody made you do it.
Do you think it can ever happen in this country? I can't find a politician who is willing to address it publicly. Many who support it privately.
Well, that's very interesting. You know, there is no issue, not gay marriage, none, on which there is greater public support and less political inaction. You know, to people listening today, and I'm sure there are plenty who are broadly in agreement with what we're discussing, I would just say, if you want change, go and talk to your local member, because that, you know, you're their employer. If they realise that there's actually people out there that seriously want this to happen, opinion polls are one thing, but if they hear it to their face, they have to pay attention. But I have discovered in my research there's a roadblock before the politicians, which I hadn't understood before I started, and that's the leadership of our medical community. polling shows that more than 50% of doctors support assisted dying. These laws are very much for doctors. It's to protect them and give them guidelines. But in my experience, the leadership of our medical bodies are blocking this conversation and in some cases running it off the rails. And of all the doctors and medical organisations I spoke to around the world, the only one that wouldn't speak to me was the AMA.
So why are they blocking?
Good question. I'm not entirely sure. I think, obviously, I think within that leadership, it's a very conservative group who, for maybe moral or ethical or other reasons, don't approve of it. But I don't think that's, we are their patients. And they are going to be their patients too. I don't think it's enough for this perhaps small group of people to impose their views on the larger community. Let's debate it openly, but let's debate it honestly. Let's find out what doctors are actually doing in this country. Let's find out how people are actually dying, and then let's decide, can we be doing it better?
Will you get on the political treadmill and argue it?
I will argue it with anyone that is happy to have the conversation. What I have discovered is that the conversation in this country has been, in many cases, very carefully and skillfully derailed by misinformation, distortion and exaggeration. And I would very happily have a conversation with any politician that wants to talk about it openly. It's not easy. I've been told that hard cases don't make good laws, to which I say, well, what's a law for if it's not to deal with hard things? But it is not acceptable, I think, to say, well, just because this is hard, we shouldn't do anything about it.
Thank you for coming in. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Neil.